Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Rangers Review. It is the day after the night before where Russell Martin has officially ended his tenure as the Rangers manager after a dramatic 123 days in charge, I think we can say. Josh, it has certainly been a day, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and night.
Yes.
And night it has been. But I think a decision that we knew was coming at some point materialised after that game, felt different after that game. And here we are again, the fourth managerial sacking in under 4 years, which I think tells you a lot about where this club's been. So lots to get into.
Yep, in this special edition podcast with myself and Josh, we're going to take you inside the story of Russell Martin's reign as Rangers manager and try and unpick where it all went wrong. But there's only one place to start, and that is at the very start. So I'll take everyone back to June and July. Russell Martin comes in the building at Rangers. He's appointed as the club's manager after the interim period of Barry Ferguson. I know that caused a little bit of consternation amongst a few fans who maybe wanted Barry to be given the job full time. But you followed the squad down south to St George's Park, the England training base, where they had this big pre-match, pre-season gathering. And what really were your first impressions of Russell Martin and the squad at that time?
Yeah, first impressions, and as you say, we've obviously spoken a lot about it, and there's a lot of so much to unpick. So I think this is hopefully a little bit of a stripped back look at things, a little bit more opinion based, but also trying to, as you say, chart it for people. There'll be more coverage on the site of this too, of how you get from Rangers appointing, and the phrase that I keep coming back to this afternoon is culture architect. That's a big thing to say. This bit from Patrick Stewart, that's what he said when Russell Martin was appointed. How do you go from this big, bold vision to unfolding in a little over 100 days' time? How do you go from really specifically trying to break this cycle of sacking managers to doing it again under a new regime? The appointment of Russell Martin is interesting because it feels as though what Rangers wanted more than anything was someone to give them an identity. They'd undergone this football review. The extent to which that is helpful, I don't know. Quite often these things can be a lot of conversations, kind of tidy up the bosses in that type of feel. But what was clear looking at Rangers was they needed some sort of identity. They jumped from manager to manager. They jumped from recruitment process to recruitment process. They needed to commit to something long term. Club DNA. There was also talk of a club DNA, a kind of document, if you will, being processed at that time to have a grounding idea that guided recruitment, that guided playing style. And this is, I think, an underestimated difficulty because Rangers have jumped around to all these different ideas. They've been signing players to try and allow squads to catch up with new managers' ideas, and by that time it's maybe not worked, and then you're in that vicious cycle again. So you've got to break that somehow at some point, but that doesn't give you, what was the saying, carte blanche.
Yes.
Said that terribly. Doesn't give you a clean slate. Doesn't give
absolutely.
you I think it was similar to Philippe Clement last year, just because there's no one above him does not mean that he should not have any scrutiny on his job. So that is why, alongside the experience of British football and alongside the spell at Rangers, those are alongside Russell Martin's ability to present well and communicate, and also the feeling that he was a leader and someone who could undergo, I guess, the stress that would be needed to make Rangers a success again, culminating him becoming the head coach. One of the key things to note at that time is there was a lot of talk and conversations I was having with people who were saying, look, this is very bold and big. And I don't quite know if there's an understanding of how quickly you have to hit the ground running here. That materialised with what Russell Martin spoke about after a 1-1 draw with St Mirren, where he said, normally we're only a few games into the season by now. Up here, you're not. Up here, there's must-win games from July 22nd. But also, the final 3 months after sacking Clement wasn't really spent preparing for Russell Martin. Okay, maybe you couldn't have gone and appointed him in that time period. You could argue that would have been just as bad because nothing to play for, trying to embed ideas. But what you could have done is, if you knew you were going towards that, you could have tried to develop a squad a little bit better, develop players, not play the likes of Cyril Dessers and Tom Lawrence and Václav Černý, and even the final 5 games, because it was such a big leap from the recruitment to the play style, to do this. What we spoke about on Saturday's podcast, it feels like too much of it has been done backwards. The preseason was positive. Martin, I think, came across well and was described as quite often pretty relaxed and charismatic behind the scenes. I think he is a head coach who enjoys doing exactly that, coaching, trying to help players improve. A lot of that time was spent working on the first phase of build-up. That was kind of like the defining part of Rangers' tactical setup early on, was we're going to take risks. We're going to have our number 6. We're going to have our fullbacks rolling inside.
And I think everyone expected that. Everyone who had watched the Russell Martin team, who had watched MK Dons, who had watched Swansea, who had watched Southampton, they seen the way that Russell Martin played football. And I don't think anybody would have been shocked when they ran out against Panathinaikos, and you've seen the way they were playing at the back. Okay, it made some people unsettled, but I think the vast majority of Rangers fans were a bit like, okay, well, this is probably what it's going to look like. But I guess what we spoke about at the time was it was almost like the Ange Postecoglou effect, that you thought, okay, if this comes good, it will be great. But unfortunately, we just never seen it come to fruition.
No, it never developed. And I think, which we'll come on to talk about, the before and after that is Bruges. And the reason that Bruges happens is, I think, the kind of story of the summer. Too much idealism, not quite enough realism, and then trying to roll backwards a little bit. So you're right, the early stages, Panathinaikos, you've got Nasser Giga playing with his back to the opposition, trying to play out. And you've got some nice moves, you've got some big risks. But the key point, and I think this was, again, underestimated a little bit maybe at the time, they weren't taking risks for the sake of risks. They're taking risks to open up spaces higher up the pitch. And what you've seen since Bruges, where often it's been Conor Barron as a number 6 or a double pivot, so the shape has changed, is because so much of the tactical setup and so much of the work done was based on that first phase of build-up, trying to play through the opposition and create space. You even saw it on the opening day against Motherwell, but to mixed degree of success. But because so much is based on that, when you cut that out and you become a little bit more pragmatic, you play long a little bit more, Jack Butland's going short less, you don't control games, and then the upside that you did have from the approach, you lose. The Rangers were conceding too many shots, conceding too many chances. That is what leads to Bruges in the end. But early on, you could at least see what they were trying to do. That only lasts for so long, right? You need to get results too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the recent weeks, it's not only been that Rangers have not been getting results, but they've not been visibly improving. And I think, as you said to me on Friday or Saturday, you can't sit and watch a game whether you're a journalist, a fan. You can't watch a game and be told something you are not seeing. Even if people felt uncomfortable with it early on, they can maybe see it. That started to evaporate as time went on.
Fans will always accept someone playing in a certain way if they're seeing something positive at the other side of it. If you, for example, are conceding goals at the back where you're playing the ball across the back line, you're playing the ball out, that is a necessary evil of getting further up the park and playing this kind of attacking football that you hope will yield a lot more goals at the other end. How many managers have we seen over the time that have been successful and have won things? They've conceded goals, but also scored a lot of goals as well. Some really exciting teams. Rangers, for a lot of the time in those early stages, just had the worst of both worlds because they were taking these horrendous chances at the back, which the Rangers crowd is notoriously a nervous one anyway, which obviously got the fans back up. And then they weren't making chances at the other end. They weren't even, as I said the other day, it gets to a point that shows you how desperate it's become that we're yearning for Cyril Dessers, because at least he had the chances to miss. We have of late, and Rangers of late have not even been making the chances to miss. And I think that in those early stages, that was possibly the most concerning thing for a lot of fans, where, Pilsen aside, you don't see anything going forward from this man who is ingrained to an attacking philosophy.
Yeah, and Dundee at home kind of shows that, right? And Dundee at home, I think, is a defining game because it shows that the Postecoglou effect in Scotland was that the effect he had in Scotland was he was so attack-minded that even if you had the risks the other way, you knew that you were going to generate chances. Whereas I think that Dundee game showed that Martin's football was a bit too concerned with control. That was a kind of core principle, control over risking a bit of chaos to attack. Now, I'm sure he would say, justifiably, it's a lot of difficult circumstances. We should touch on recruitment, and we will continue to speak about that this week because it's a huge factor you can't ignore.
Yeah.
The point is, Blair, I think all these extenuating circumstances need to do two things. They need to inform your appointment of the coach. And Ali McCoy said, I think, on TalkSport earlier, that for him it's just the new ownership, the decision makers have underestimated the size and scale of task. And I think it's hard to argue against that because you need to look at Martin's style, the changes that are going to happen, and think, is this the optimum environment for this to play out? So Martin would probably say it's not a close representation of what he wants his style to look like, but you need to make it work. You need to build the plane while flying. You need to get the idea off the ground. And Bruges is the culmination of that, which again we'll get on to, because of the chances that Rangers are conceding. At the same time, you've got this issue of the spine of the squad is not there. You have publicly called out James Tavernier and Nico Raskin, not by name. We've called out selfishness and self-preservation and dropped them as two players. Again, we can come on to that. But then you've not got the leaders to replace them, Joe Rothwell and Max Aarons. That was Rothwell's first start since Bruges at Falkirk on Sunday. All this is culminating in Rangers conceding a lot of chances, which you see even in Pilsen away when they're 3-0 up and it should be comfortable. Yeah. I've got a statistic for you.
You love a statistic,
I
Josh.
do. In the 8 preceding seasons, Rangers conceded more than 3 expected goals, which is a lot, on 3 occasions in 102 UEFA games. That count has been matched in 7 games in 25-26. This was after Genk.
So
I'll give one more bit of context. Breaking overall and non-penalty records, beefing up the records with the worst, second worst, and 4th worst defensive, showing credit to friend of the show, Patrick Casquet. So just to translate what that means, basically, in the 8 preceding seasons, Rangers conceded that high a chance value in 102 UEFA games. So across Europa League, across the Champions League, that ill-fated Champions League campaign. And I think 2 of those 3 games were in that Champions League campaign against Napoli and Liverpool. Already this season, they have matched that total with the chances conceded. I believe it was at home to Genk, it was away at Pilsen, and I don't know what the other... Bruges, obviously. Bruges, maybe both Bruges games. So that, again, just demonstrates that the game Rangers had against Bruges, especially when they went down to 10 men, was not achieved in isolation. I think it was a culmination of trying to do too much too soon, and it leads to a night which is kind of completely a demonstration of idealism over realism, best demonstrated, I think, by not locking down the game in the first half, waiting until half-time, but then also not having the leaders that you need at a club like Rangers, especially in a moment like this, to take control and take ownership.
Yeah, we'll come on to that Bruges game because it's such an important turning point in the whole of the Russell Martin tenure. The home and away legs against Bruges really seem to sum up, and they are a microcosm of the whole Russell Martin era. That home game to begin with, Rangers concede one of the most ridiculous goals I've ever seen at Ibrox in the mix-up between Nasser Giga and Jack Butland. And it sets the tone for the whole tie. And it almost gave the fans a hopelessness because it had been building to this point. And the way they were playing about at the back and the chances they were giving up at the back, it was almost like you knew this was coming. And it was only a matter of time before a goal like that was conceded. And then you go into that second leg, you can make your argument that maybe a bit unlucky to go 3-1 down with that Gassama goal that's probably not rightly ruled out. You go into that game 3-2, it does look a bit different. In hindsight, you could say on paper, oh, well, they're only one goal down going into that second leg. But that second leg is such a capitulation from the first minute, and then almost compounded. I remember speaking to you that night going, why is he not shoring it up? Why is he not biting the bullet? Why is he letting his ego run away with himself that he just refused to just sit in? Because we all knew it was done. We all knew the tie was gone. But for some reason, he decided to continue with this, and it ended up being potentially one of the worst nights in Rangers history. Yeah.
So if we start with the home tie, Russell Martin said after the Falkirk goal, after the game yesterday, he was speaking about the Falkirk goal, and he was kind of saying, there's a bit of a deflection on the strike, right? And he said, I've actually not even watched it back because we've been so busy discussing other things.
It's not as if anything's happened in the last 24 hours. So.
I know. Just slept about 4 hours. But I'm not complaining. I'm talking about football before someone rightly tells me off in the comments. But
the comments are going to eviscerate you.
No. We're all friends. We're all friends. But that home game. Russell Martin said after the Falkirk goal, these kind of goals, these things just seem to be happening against us. It doesn't exist in isolation. That goal against Bruge at home, I think, is a result of Jack Butland. And Rangers were active in looking to pursue a goalkeeper all summer. Jack Butland's alongside Jeji Gisama being their two most impactful players, and I don't think they'd have got through in Europe without, I guess, the individualism of those two. That's maybe being a bit harsh because you could make that argument for anything.
I think I said that yesterday. With hindsight, that looks to be an incredible stroke of luck that Jack Butland wasn't actually moved on this summer, because I think he's been the best player so far this season. Yeah,
and I don't know if Rangers would have managed to move him on, but they definitely were looking at someone to come in and compete and make that in the same way that you've seen them do it with James Tavernier and Nico Raskin. Both those players subsequently earned their spot back. But that goal doesn't exist in isolation. It's a result of playing a high line with a goalkeeper who maybe isn't that confident. It's a result of your leader in the back four still being John Souttar, instead of getting someone in early who you could build around, who could be a new captain, represent a new spine. So all that doesn't exist in isolation. Then you've got Russell Martin says after that game, it will make, I can't remember the exact line, but something along the lines of, we'll make sure that tonight is the hardest it is for them. And then when you're 5-0 down against Club Bruge a week later, words start to lose meaning.
Yeah, I remember it was after the first game, he said something on the lines of, "You'll never see a goal like that again."
Yeah.
And then we proceeded to see goals that were very similar to that for the rest of the time.
Yeah. So and Bruges is such a capitulation. You're right that that's like everyone has a breaking point, and every manager, if you listen to what Russell Martin spoke about, and at times I think he was unfairly characterised, but at times he spoke very defiantly about, we're not going to change. I can't ask them to do something different because this is how they got here. But there's always a breaking point. There's always, you see it with Postecoglou at the moment in England, who's becoming a bit more pragmatic. He did that to win the Europa League, so that was his kind of breaking point. And for Martin, keeping Danilo on that night, keeping Gassama and Leo Cameron. And two of the goals are just Leo Cameron and Gassama not tracking the men because they're defending the box and they're not fullbacks. What should have happened there in that game, anyone, I think the majority of people who watch football would say, you lock it down, you get out there with a 2 or 3-0, and it's frustrating, but it's not humiliating. But in keeping trying to play, and again lacking those leaders because Nico Raskin's on the bench and James Tavernier has been dropped by that point, all of these different myriad of factors combine to cause that. And it is so bad that when it's 8-1 at halftime, you're going, to how much worse could this get? Because it felt as if Bruges wanted at that point, and they hit the woodwork a few times that night too. It felt like as though they could have went on and scored more. So to recover from something like that, you need to almost be perfect. To retain players' belief, you probably need to have a few good wins too. And I don't think the Rangers dressing room is just in conversations over the last few weeks, I don't think it's been an open revolt. But it's a lot of young players, a lot of people trying to find their way, a lot of players who maybe need leadership themselves to try and open up certain performances. And you see that, right, in that if they score the first goal, Rangers, they can play for a little bit. But if they concede the first goal, they have struggled to come from behind and win it. So that all
when
those factors,
when they start losing momentum in games, you can see it affects them really badly. You've seen that the last 2 weeks with Livingston and Falkirk. They've looked pretty good in the first half. They've been dominant. They've taken the lead, and then they switch off after half time, and then you get that 20-minute spell where the opposition are on top of them, and then they end up capitulating at the end.
Yeah. So from there, you need it to almost be perfect. The Celtic game, which we'll move on to maybe, that's when the change happens. So that's when Rangers don't have a number 6, and you see how all these things are connected, right? Because of what you've done in the transfer market, you don't have a number 6 then, because Rothwell hasn't worked. Raskin is frozen out at that point for events after the Bruges game. So you go to more of a 4-2-3-1, and okay, you shore things up, but Rangers don't have a shot on target. They create 0.17 expected goals. They stay with the same setup for Hearts the next week. And although over the 90 minutes, I think they're unfortunate to lose against Hearts because of the referee calls in particular. They've then changed shape. They've moved Tello Asgard and Jeji Gisama out to the right. And that's when I think they start to play catch up, and it's more reactive than proactive. And again, because it is. Russell Martin said it's not the end of the world when you lose draw 3 games 1-1, because it is the end of the world.
Yeah.
You don't have the capital to ask fans for patience.
I also think you must look at that time, and so much has been made about the fact that Russell Martin came in and tried to implement such an intricate and complicated, maybe the wrong word, but he gave these players a lot of information at the start of the season, a lot.
Especially compared to what they'd been used to.
Absolutely. And we know that these players were told a lot of things that they may not have been used to before. And you had to wonder how that affected the dressing room when all of a sudden the Bruge game is so bad that you see this man who has been so fixated on a certain way of playing start to change and start to doubt himself. Maybe he doesn't doubt himself, but that's how it comes across when you see him going, okay, see all this thing that I was trying to put in all summer, it's not working.
Yeah.
And we need to try and do something else.
Because that was the element, again, doing a bit of work and due diligence on this kind of like throughout the summer. That was the work, that was the element that was so pronounced, was how they build up and how that shapes the rest of the game. That's where the majority of risks are taken. So when that started, you saw it even against Falkirk. Rangers can't play through in the same way because that's not Barron's game. He's an industrious player, but he's better when the game's in front of him. Raskin and Rothwell in different ways can allow you to play out. So from that point on, I think you're somewhat fighting a losing battle. And then that takes us back to, well, what was the preparation and groundwork for this? If you'd appointed a sporting director, Blair, at like Christmas time, and they could start to work on the squad instead of effectively pressing reset on transfer targets from June onwards, then maybe the squad's in a better place and maybe it's ready. Maybe you have a couple more ready now leaders who can help the team implement it, which is what Max Aarons and Joe Rothwell were meant to be. And maybe you get a little bit more luck. I think back to Michael Beale's time in charge where that goal was ruled off in the Old Firm game.
Cyril Dessers one.
Yeah, you look at Russell Martin as a fraction away from John Suter heading Rangers into a lead in the Old Firm.
Yeah.
You think back to the Dundee game when Cyril Dessers is a fraction offside. So, of course, there's all these moments. But again, I think the point is, to a degree, you create your own luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you've spent this much money, when you've got one domestic win after 7 games, I don't think you can hang it on those fine margins. You do need them. You do need bits of luck. I'd also argue that Rangers probably had it in home leg against Panathinaikos when Jack Butland was great in the first half.
Yeah, I think you look at those early European games and what everybody was saying was the warning signs are here. That Panathinaikos game, you looked at the amount of chances that were being given up and you went, this already is not sustainable, because as soon as you come up against seasoned operators, a team who will take their chances, as Bruges did, you just knew Rangers were going to take a battering. And I even go back to the Alloa game at Ibrox, and you think about that, and you think how Alloa managed to rip Rangers apart two times.
Connor Salmon running through and goal at 3-2 down.
Connor Salmon running past the defence, and you go, if Alloa can do this, this is only going to keep happening. And to go back to the Celtic game, an interesting point on that, for me, the only reason that was heralded as any sort of good result was because it was against Celtic. I think if you take the context of the fact that it's an Old Firm derby and everyone expected Rangers to lose, it's a bad performance. It's not a creative performance. It's not an attacking performance. It's not a dominant performance you'd expect at Ibrox. It was can we basically nullify this game into nothing and take a point out of it?
And that's also Celtic, who are in the worst state they've been in a number of times. But yet again, if you're looking at this from a strategic decision-making point of view, Rangers have not been strong enough to strike well. The iron is hot, for want of a better phrase. And I agree with you about that Old Firm, that it was it was fine, but it was like bare minimums, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can't be held up as progress. And that's the difficulty, because where I sympathise with Russell Martin is that many managers have come in before and tried and failed. It's a difficult job. I think you read a lot of the international coverage about this, and I think it was in the Observer I was reading today, they calling the Rangers job the most difficult job in world football, which is maybe a bit of a nice soundbite.
I think Manchester United might have something to say about that, but
but it's looking at it from the outside, it does not look like an easy job. However, again, that's when you look critically at the decision making and you think, well, should it, rather than scaling back, rather than doing it backwards, introduce it a little bit more slowly? Maybe be a little bit less dogmatic. For example, Motherwell on the opening day of the season, you see Rangers ended the game with a midfield of by Rami, Cameron and Barron when they've got centre-halves on the bench. There's also decisions around Russell Martin when you're looking at where the money has been spent, how it's been spent, where is the squad stronger, that you look at the quality of player he has to work with. But he had a healthy say in recruitment too from Jaden Magoma and a number of other players who were quite specifically linked to him in terms of coming up the road to Rangers. So I've sympathy with him because it is a very difficult job. It became so toxic, and that must have been really difficult to deal with. However, this wasn't a clean slate in regard to fans who've been watching a certain unsuccessful football team for far too long. This new regime was supposed to herald in a new era, and yet they're watching probably football worse than last season when it didn't look like they could go much lower. So you understand the anger and the checking out, as I say, because especially since Bruges, before that you could maybe say, okay, the risks are there. Is this going to work in the future? Don't know. Since that point, it's felt like things aren't developing because Rangers aren't getting back into the game against Sturm Graz as they almost did through a development of their style of play. They're just chucking everything they have at it.
Yeah,
that's not sustainable.
Sama goal comes from just him.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other part of this, if we take a look, move away from things that are happening on the park, you'll look at Martin's personal relationships with the players and how he handled so many of the situations that cropped up. And I said this on the morning briefing today. I can't believe there's been so many incidents in 123 days. The one I always start with is Kieran Dowell, when he is made a lot of in pre-season that he is one of the leadership group, that he is going to be one of the big figures in this dressing room. And almost as soon as the transfer window closes, he's nowhere to be seen. He's nowhere on the park. And I remember Kieran Dowell getting that really hostile reception at Ibrox and Martin getting asked about it and then kind of brushing it off. But that was just that was sort of a warning sign. It was foreshadowing what was to come, because the fans made it very clear that this guy is not the one for us and he's not good enough. And Martin almost bowed to that in a sense by just not including him in the squad as that went on. And then you look at the Nico Raskin affair. You look at how that was handled. You look at the way he misled the fans in the press conference when he said that he was training and was very selective about his words. Of course, it came to pass that he was training in the gym on his own. Yep. You look at the way he handled the Hamza Egeman situation. I remember the furor that caused at the time when he came out after that St Mirren game and said point blank that he refused to play, essentially, when everybody knew he was leaving. He was on his way to Lille, and it was another thing that he could just deflect away from the actual result. And you even go back to that first game of the season against Motherwell, and he comes out and he torches his own players, saying that they need to drop their egos. Yeah. There's too many guys out there doing whatever they want to do. And I remember standing in the press room that day, and every single journalist looked around and went, "Oh, he's gone early with that. He's gone very. He's
played that card early.
Yeah, because you only get to play that card once.
100%.
We've sat through enough Rangers managers, enough managers in football, enough press conferences that you know when a manager is angry, and it usually takes a bit of time to build up to that. And when they go all out in a press conference like that, they're usually doing it to spark a response because they've got nothing left and they don't have any other cards to play. Doing that on the first day of the season, in hindsight, looks crazy.
And the game immediately after Motherwell, was that Victoria Pilsen at home? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Who was speaking about James Tavernier and Nico Raskin being dropped after that?
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah.
But it was one game.
Absolutely.
So this is so when you then need to go and put out an SOS call to Tavernier and Raskin when you're 5-0 down, or whenever Tavernier came on, maybe it was 2-0, but Raskin came on at halftime. When you then need to call upon them, when you then need to rely upon them as your core, and that materializes right up until the last few weeks, that's when it looks like a bad move.
Absolutely.
If Joe Rothwell had come in and been brilliant and Nico Raskin hadn't got a look in, if Max Aarons had proved the eventual successor to James Tavernier, if Rangers had signed a few players of which to form the new spine of their squad, that does not become a conversation. But when it doesn't, when all these little things add up, the suit conversation we had with Johnny, all these small dynamics, they count against you. I was speaking to someone who's worked closely with a number of Rangers managers last week, and they were saying this job is so big, and it requires so much, and especially a club of this size, when you're not on top and you're trying to get back on top, because it requires such a figurehead. that you need the strongest managerial team around you, and you almost need to be a figurehead with a brilliant coach underneath you to do a lot of the work.
Yeah.
And Martin had a lot of
Gerard with Michael Beale.
Yeah, and a whole team, Gary McAllister and a number of other members of that coaching staff who he could trust and he could delegate to, and he could take a bit of a step back. You even saw it with Beale. He initially was working alongside a sporting director. I don't think it's a coincidence that summer where so much falls upon his shoulder. Okay, I'm sure he wanted a lot of that decision-making power. But also you can't say that he had the optimum environment to succeed, right? And naturally things just start to deteriorate because you're spreading yourself thin. The quality maybe isn't there. The reason I'm bringing that up is it's such a big job to try and implement a new style, transition out a whole spine in effectively a month and a half, or a month, because the players came back on June 23rd. The Panathinaikos qualifier was July 22nd. That's, again, I think we need to look at this and think, is this appointment right now? Is this idea going to be able to get off the ground? Do we need a year of transitioning out some of these guys and building a new squad and then having a really good launch pad to attack this with an ambitious appointment next season? Too much was done too soon. And again, if you compare the Motherwell outburst, and it's important to say that he didn't name Tavernier and Raskin explicitly. No. However, he did drop them for the next game alongside Danilo and Kieran Dowell. He had the first two signings he made were to challenge those two players. We can read between the lines. There was tense moments, and
you don't have to be Poirot to work out exactly what was going on there.
Exactly, and there was tension within that. Naturally, it just felt again like a case of too much too soon, because if you had 5 senior players coming in who are ready to usurp James Tavernier and Nico Raskin, and if Rangers had kept winning after that Pilsen game, I think Russell Martin could have got rid of anyone. Even Raskin, who's a big fan favourite, but if it meant success. When it does not translate to success, that's different.
I think you look at the continual nature of Rangers teams who haven't won league titles. I think you get to the end of a season and everyone's up for grabs. Everyone's up for sale, because in Rangers terms, not winning a league is failure. And as far as fans are concerned, the whole team can be changed. If you change 11 players and you win the league, it's a great decision. It's a wonderful decision. But like you said, initially bringing in your own guys to challenge those places, as we can assume that he wanted his own guys in these key positions, realizing that they're not good enough or they're not up to it, and then having to roll back and go back cap in hand to the guys who you essentially were trying to bomb out, it doesn't make for a good environment.
No, it doesn't. And again, that goes back to if you signed 3 or 4 or 5 players who can almost challenge that and say, well, I'm the new guy here, then it becomes a different story. But James Tavernier's left out for that home game against Bruges. Comes off the bench, has started every game since. Max Aarons had a spell of 3 games where he was the first choice right back, and all of these factors combined, it's all related, because, as you say, is it a happy place, or does it just feel very heavy, as was the case last season? I remember really clearly a conversation with someone last season who was speaking to me before the Queen's Park game. It was just after Rangers had put themselves into the top 8 of the Europa League. I think they'd beaten USG at home.
And they got through because they'd managed to jump up because other results had gone their way.
Exactly. So brilliant result, brilliant achievement for the team, for Clermont, who underperformed drastically domestically with much less investment. But still, we can hark back and say, that was also bad, and that was also not going anywhere.
Both can exist at the same time.
Both can exist at the same time, and it's easy to fall into revisionism. But it was said to me that time, it's taken all of this season to get the mood in a good place. The players went off to London together. It was a changing room that had grown quite a lot. Rangers had brought in a lot of young players. They'd really diversified their squad, recruiting in a lot of different markets. And then you have the Queen's Park game, and it's done. It's finished. You're on the floor again. The rules are just, I think, because they're different up here. You need to, if you're gonna implement a new style, if you're gonna make an unpopular appointment, you need to keep winning. You need more Pilsens. But when you don't have that, very quickly plateaus in those dives.
We also must caveat this by saying the players are not blameless in this situation. Course, because you look at Nico Raskin, for example. I said this morning. He had to hold up his end of the bargain. because when he comes back into the team, he has to justify why the fans are singing his name, why the fans are showing such an obvious act of defiance towards the manager in favour of Nico Raskin, and he's not really done that to
I think he's playing. I also think he's playing out of position.
Yeah.
I also think he's.
I think it'll be fascinating to see how Nico Raskin plays under the next manager.
Yeah,
fascinating to see.
And also what that we won't get into it today because we've got a week of talking, 2 weeks of talking about it, and there's loads to discuss. But
the viewers will be sick of us by the time Friday comes.
I know. All excited in our new studio. But what is if you're going to implement a new style of play that perhaps isn't a great cultural fit with Ibrox, and by that I mean slow possession that's about control. But that was in line with this club DNA being formed with this football review. Where do you go next? How specifically is this squad built to Russell Martin? How specifically is it tailored? You've got 4 loan signings. You've got a back 4 that is almost, or a defensive unit that's almost entirely out of contract next season. Do you go for a quicker style of play that's just a better cultural fit, even if you trade off a little bit of control? A lot of big questions to answer, and a lot of unknowns at the moment. You've got to say.
So I guess as we just start to wrap up a little bit here, we kind of look at where we're left with now, because Russell Martin is gone. It's what the majority of the fans wanted. But remaining in post are Patrick Stewart, are Kevin Thelwell, and of course Andrew Kavanagh at the top of the club. And as far as we know, Andrew Kavanagh, when he was over here, he had a good relationship with the players. He spoke to the players. And now Russell Martin has been taken out of the equation. Where does this leave all of these other main players in this whole thing?
Yeah, well, he spent a week out. So he had read the squad before the Old Firm game. He spent a week between Hibs and who was it, Genk at home.
Yeah.
The Genk game was the first game. The protest had happened before the game against Hibs, and I'm sure he wasn't unaware of that, being situated in the Blue Room pre-match. But the Genk game was the first game where he really saw, okay, this is what it's like. And he had to effectively determine, is it broken? Is it salvageable? Because you can go through and you can ride through pain. You see, if you knew, for example, if you had a crystal ball that the underlying numbers all point towards Rangers are going to come good and they could win the league, that's when you need strong leaders to say, no, we're going to take the abuse now and ride out the storm because it'll be worth it in the end. Because
you have a strong enough belief in that this will turn at some point.
But Rangers' expected goal difference after 7 games is 0.13. And for context, it was 0.86 last season, and that was bad.
Yeah.
That's the difference between the chances being created and the chances that you're conceding the end in a shot. So it doesn't take into consideration everything, but it's a pretty good indicator. So he had to make that decision alongside other senior figures in this emergency meeting that wasn't with the whole board, we're led to believe, but senior decision makers last night when we were recording on Monday. So yeah, last night on Sunday to relieve Russell Martin of his duties. Where they go now and what they do next is fascinating. If you gave me the keys to the kingdom, which I know they will not, and they shouldn't, I'm not qualified.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But
that's one for the viewers who continually say they'd like to see the Rangers review in the dugout.
That's a podcast episode, to be fair. The roles would fill in the management team.
Leave the comments below. Who should be the manager? Who's the physio?
There would be so many fights between me and Johnny in particular. I think I don't think I'd last long, but. If it was up to me and it's an ideal situation, I would go for Gerrard 100% because I think he'd be the unity candidate. Absolutely. I don't think anyone's criticised. If you're Patrick Stewart and Kevin Thelwell, no one's criticising you for appointing him.
Not at all.
Gives you a figurehead. He's won here before. It wasn't perfect. There'd be loads of questions about how does this squad suit his style. I didn't watch a load of his football in Saudi Arabia, so I don't know how his teams played. The Michael Beale factor, all these different situations.
What I would say, if you hire Gerrard tomorrow, Paisley Road West is filled with Rangers fans turning up to see him coming back.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
You are getting the feel-good factor as a given.
Yeah.
Before the ball is kicked.
Yeah.
And that is so important to
because it would leverage the club for you. And again, we've used this example a few times with what you've seen McInnes do at Hearts, and he's another name that will be in the discussion externally at least. As we understand it, the decision at the moment and the conversations at the moment are very much assessing the state of play and trying to work out what happens next. Because although in the last few weeks there's perhaps been an acknowledgement that things are broken, and that Rangers went all in on this project just over 100 days ago. So it's not as if contingency planning is a good buzzword. To what extent are you ready for that? We'll wait and see. But you're right, that would be a unifying appointment. Not everyone would like it, and some people will be watching this video saying don't go backwards, and I totally understand that, because that's kind of how I felt in the summer. And but the reason I also say that is, can you go for another project hire at the moment? Is there someone obvious, or do you go with not an interim but almost an appointment that just buys you a bit of time? The risk is, if this goes wrong,
another Barry Ferguson style, that type of
thing. But I think he'd only take it if it was given it on a permanent contract.
Absolutely,
But because of the cycle that Rangers are in, they've sacked 4 managers in less than 4 years. That's hard to break, and you need to get the right appointment. And it's bigger than the manager, and it's wider than the manager. And we've talked about the recruitment changes that have been made, and obviously Robbie Thelwell coming into the conversation
am I right
too.
in saying that Gerrard was the last manager to see out a full campaign? I don't think we've had a manager who has seen out a start to finish campaign since Steven Gerrard.
Yeah, because Clement sacked in February, Beale sacked.
I think Clement, Gio, Michael Beale all did half of one season, half of the other. Yeah. So, and Clement did a little bit more in the end, because he got till February. But that is where I would sit. But it wasn't the right time for Gerrard. We know that in the summer. Would it be now? What type of guarantees would he want? Because there's a lot of money being spent. What type of money is there? What type of assets does this squad have? It's an absolutely huge job, and it's bigger than it was in the summer because of what has unfolded in the last over 100 days. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. The fact you just mentioned about contingency plans there, this board would not have been expecting to have to make this decision now. No chance.
No. And there's a difference between having that as an option, or it becoming a reality. No one could have foreseen, I don't think, it going. Even the most cynical could have seen it going this badly, this quickly. After Bruges, anyone knows, there's no coming back from that, really, unless you're absolutely perfect. But it's going to be a real test of a new regime who thought they would not be in this situation this early, and fascinating to see where they turn to and what they do next.
Yes, but this is the situation that we find ourselves in, and this week will no doubt be a fascinating watch to see where Rangers turn after the departure of Russell Martin. And here at the Rangers Review, we will have all the best insight from in and around Ibrox as we wait to see who will be Rangers' next permanent manager, or perhaps not permanent manager. Let's see.
Exciting.
Let's see how it goes. But once again, thank you all for watching, and thank you all for listening.